Yeah, we start recording now.
Okay, that's great. So, hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine. So, we can start now, I guess. And so, are you ready, basically?
I'm ready. I don't know what questions I'm going to be asked.
Sorry?
I don't know which questions I'm going to be asked, but I'll take it.
Yes, don't worry. We will ask some questions. But
I will.
Just a moment, because you are not very well. It would be better to increase the volume somehow.
Let me know when it's loud enough.
Yeah, your voice.
Okay. Yeah, okay. No, it's okay. Simono, jak se to přehazují ty obrázky? Takhle, ne? Jo, okay. I think it's good. So,
okay, good.
Yeah. Okay, maybe I will go a little bit forward, because you are somehow quiet, but it's okay. So, Guy, we will start with the paper you have published a month ago or something like that. And this paper looked quite important because it criticized the situation in common agricultural policy in Europe. And I would like to, or we would like to ask you, what do you think what are the main positive aspects of the new common agricultural policy, and what are the problems of the CAP? If you can summarize it somehow.
I think the positive aspects of the common agricultural policy are summarized by flexibility. So the EU did recognize that there's a need to green the CAP. They did recognize a need to incorporate, again, actually, as it was until 2009, some compulsory elements on the greening issue. And they have been going through very complicated negotiations. So I would summarize it by the fact that the EU gave a lot of flexibility to the different member states in doing better.
I can interrupt you, so you assess this flexibility as a positive aspect, because for me, for example, it is quite negative, because it means that most of member states, they choose the lower level of the obligations, and in fact the result is very sad, and is not what we expected. And I think that it is mostly due to this flexibility, where we go to minimum level of obligations and don't try to be more ambitious.
I completely agree that the flexibility itself is the positive, but also the negative effect, because indeed some member states took the more positive options and some of them took the negative options. Now,
are there many states that took the more demanding approaches?
Well, eventually the UK, and especially within the UK, Wales took a relatively good decision on the CAP. Netherlands followed as well with some good decisions. Non-surprisingly, Germany took quite a bad decision, and for instance, took the worst case scenario in terms of allowing ecological focus areas to include pesticides and other agrochemicals. So indeed, flexibility is both the opportunity and the risk. And at the moment, what we see is that especially in new member states like Czech Republic, people have taken this flexibility to the worst side. And one of the issues that we were strongly showing is, and this is something which was very important for us in this paper, is to actually give the numbers. What is the meaning of the different numbers that are required by the EU? Explaining to the EU that the thresholds that they put are so low that especially in countries like new member states, like Czech Republic, like Romania, Bulgaria, where you have a lot of small farmers, they actually exempt more than 90% of the farmers. And this is bad to the farmers. It's not only bad to biodiversity. There's a decrease in agricultural employment. in Czech Republic, for instance, there's a loss of 60% in the last 5 years only in agricultural employment among farmers with under 10 hectares of farmland.
Is it the result of lobbying of agriculture chambers, or what is the reason of this?
It is a combined result of urbanization and taking over. Eventually, some farmers receive more money than others, and usually these are the large farmers because they receive money to support their large area. So the consequence is that what the CAP did was presumably to give some elements of compulsory requirements from the large farms, but actually these are the less important ones. Now, other positive things are an increase in the budget, potential proportional budget to the Pillar 2, to the rural development, but they have actually not defined where is this money going to. So member states can put their money onto environmental effects, or they can put their money into intensification in rural areas, and in that case they really do the worst. And overall, when we are looking at the budget, it depends on the modulation. It depends on whether countries are moving money between Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Some countries chose on a positive modulation and chose to move some money into Pillar 2, into the rural development. Actually, Czech Republic did put 4% into modulation. Unfortunately,
so how do you assess our 4%? Is it on the lowest end, at the lowest end, 4%, and only for, as I wrote you, those well-criticized welfare measures, which are not very positive from the even welfare point of view?
That's correct. So there is a risk for greenwashing. And we are seeing this risk being fulfilled in some countries. France, by the way, took the same approach. They gave a positive number in terms of modulation, but when you look what they did with the money, they actually put the money onto elements that do not support the environment. So the consequence is that we are approaching a true risk, and this was something that was very important for us in this paper, to clarify that we are approaching a true risk of defining as if we are greening, whereas in fact we are just supporting the same processes of intensification. We see the bird farmland index continuing to go down, especially in member states, in the new member states. We see continuation of increase in farm size. We see continuation of loss of agricultural employment, and therefore all of us, and when I'm saying us, I'm talking about European citizens, should all have the interest to see that we are putting our efforts not into production, but into food quality. Food security and food production were mixed up during the negotiation deliberately. And this is not the same. And a lot of people are already providing a lot of evidence on how you can provide food security and food quality. And it's not by food production. Food production helps some farmers to produce more, but that has nothing to do with food prices. It has nothing to do with the fact that there are 30% overproduction of food in Europe. We don't need to produce more food. We need to produce quality food, potentially organic food that is also positive in terms of the effect on biodiversity. And this is what is frustrating for the situation. The compromise that the EU was taking was unnecessary because there are ways to get into win-win situations. It's just that they did not take the evidence which exists and used it.
And where do you see the reason? It seems that we conservationists and nature conservation that lost at the beginning. The proposal of new CAP was very positive, and there was much potential. And during those long negotiations, the result is very unsatisfactory. Where do you see the reason? What we could have done better? Where did we make mistakes, like we conservationists and biologists, and did we lobby too little, or we are not strong so much? Where is the problem?
I think one of the problems that conservationists are facing is how to deal with uncertainty. So we don't know how to deal with uncertainty. One of the questions that came up is whether we really need, for instance, 10% or 7% or 5% ecological focus area. And a farmer sees the effects in terms of the immediate benefit lost by producing on smaller areas. Therefore, from the perspective of a farmer, it is very clear loss compared to an uncertain gain that we're asking for. On the other hand, this is the role of governments and of the EU to think in the larger scale, to think about the long-term benefits, to speak about the benefits to the entire society and not only to specific farmers. And it was also a mistake from our perspective to show, or the need to show, the win-win situations, especially to the small farmers. These should have been our main target group, because these are the ones who do not receive the money. They do not receive enough support. And actually what our paper is showing is that we can gain a lot of win-win, a lot of benefits, even nowadays, within the flexibility which still exists for countries to change. Within a country and within a year, there is still a lot of flexibility in the budget. So there is a need for more advisory. We need to be more involved in consultancy. We should be very happy that within the new CAP, there's a compulsory demand for countries to invest in a farm advisory system. And we need even now to be involved in this farm advisory system and say, hey, use this money funded by the rural development programs to fund advisory for agro-environmental measures, because they're not simple. And as conservationists, we had a problem of dealing with measures which are not simple, and we know it. So the problem was that when the government had to balance between simple and complex, simple means what the farmers or the big farmers want, and complex is how to deal with agro-environmental schemes. And they had to deal with uncertainty about what the single farmer is gaining versus what society is gaining or losing. They made the wrong choice, but we also were not involved enough in understanding who are the main winners from a better CAP. And the main winners are the small farmers and are the broader society. And we should not have engaged in the question whether it's 10, 7, or 5%. Instead, we should have been more involved in the question, what is quality? What is a high-quality ecological focus area? Because this is something we do have evidence on. And making sure that the EU does not approve ecological focus areas which are not ecological. Because the consequence is that now they're greenwashing. But at least now, we are still at the point where we should be demanding a midterm review. And if the Parliament, which is starting the first meetings in July, does not discuss the need for a midterm review, we will fail the biodiversity target in 2020. And
the problem is that the way this politics is formed in the Czech Republic, it's not looking for public interest. It's really short-term view and pushing from one lobby interest to another lobby interest. And what you say is an ideal state, but it's really not the case. We should see here. So,
so maybe the question is, okay, you started with saying that flexibility is a good thing, but on the other hand, it is also a risk, and in particular countries, it can be really dangerous. Is it even possible? Now it is over, but would it be possible to make the CAP differently, less flexible, with a stronger push on the countries? And would because I'm not sure that it would be even possible to be more strict and to have stronger requirements and so on. What do you think?
I would add another aspect. You mentioned in your article that, for example, there are no criteria for those ecological areas, which is not flexibility. It seems to me that it is really failure of the CAP. So it's just adding to the.
Well, when you ask me what is positive and what is negative in the CAP, I have to consider both the flexibility is an opportunity at the national level, even if it's a risk, because we as scientists working within the national level can press on our governments to do better. But our power to affect the EU is almost marginal, I would say. We were not invited to the negotiations, although we actually asked to do that. When the Society for Conservation Biology was offering our help, offering our expertise, we were not invited. But on the other hand, as scientists and as conservationists, we do have the knowledge, the power to approach the local municipality and to approach the farmers and to take the knowledge which we have usually from the landscape level or from the country level and approach the government and use this flexibility to try to change things at the level where we are most experts on. So I agree completely that they gave too much flexibility to the countries, and in this sense, the EU definitely failed. They failed to provide an overarching strategy for the common agricultural policy. This is why the title of our paper was, sorry, but you failed.
Yeah.
Hence, there is no to save that. On the other hand, they did give the government and ourselves some opportunity to play with this flexibility and try to do better. Some elements of flexibility still remain existing because the budgets, to a certain extent, are still decided within the year. Because the agreements with the farmers are very often decided based on contracts within the year. And because if we are now pressing on the governments to demand a midterm review, then we still have the opportunity to change things by 2017. And if we slowly bring it to society that we will not accept, as a public society, that we will not accept the word ecological focus areas for something which is not ecological, or that governments such as the Czech Republic is claiming that they are protecting grasslands, and actually Czech Republic has seen an increase in the cover of grassland, whereas every ecologist can see that the quality of the grasslands has diminished. This is not acceptable. And actually there is real flexibility for government to define high nature value areas out of Natura 2000 areas. Most governments do not communicate this flexibility because they don't want to do it, but it is possible. The EU does allow governments to do something which is new, which would be greener and would be better for the environment and is doable. But it is our role as scientists to explain why it is important and not to give up and say that it's too late, because some elements of the CAP are not too late. And especially the agri-environmental schemes, which are the most important tools to gain some successes, they require our consultancy. And we can help the governments to achieve cost efficiency because it costs them less money to put their money on consultancy in order to achieve more efficiency among the farmers that really require this money. So in sense of cost efficiency, agri-environmental schemes should be our goal in the future. And they also target the most important farmers in the extensive areas, in the remote areas, those that actually need our help. And this opportunity is not closed. It is still there within the flexibility of the governments. And are within the flexibility which we still have and the EU has given us. True that agri-environmental schemes existed before, but still, through the farm advisory system, we could improve it a little bit more. And this is not to say that there has been a success. It's only to say that we should not give up. Wait, Lenka. Please disconnect and start again because I hear you very abruptly. I cannot hear very well, and I don't know also if this is recorded this way.
Yeah.
Can we?
Is it better now? Is it better?
A little bit, but it just goes up and down. So it could be that we might need to disconnect and connect again.
We would have. Is it better?
Yes, but only for the moment. I hope for.
Okay, wait. We can have.
I will try to formulate my question. We would have one rather philosophical question, a little bit difficult before we go to more specific things of CAP, and that is there is quite a skeptical mood in the Czech Republic. If the CAP is the right answer to support biodiversity and stop the decline of biodiversity, and if because it is they call it engineering of landscape. You know, you create a very complex and difficult system of supports and obligations and all that. And if there are not if you scientists don't think about new models of managing landscapes in some innovative way, or I don't know how to formulate it, if you understand.
Well, I think I understand your question, and the problem is actually something that was discussed for a long time in the UK as well. And part of the consequence of this discussion is that the budgets to the CAP have been reduced with the time, because a lot of civilians and citizens are complaining that there should be no reason why we should fund an industry. Why are we subsidizing farmers? From the first place, there is a very weird behavior here where there is a demand from farmers to behave according to the rules, and we are actually paying them to follow the rules. So there is a problem in the CAP in general. On the other hand, I think it is good, and this is my personal opinion, I think all in all it is good that we have the CAP. If we didn't have the money to support the farmers, they would simply abandon and other farmers would take over. So the speed of large companies taking over and the speed of intensification likely would have been a lot larger unless the CAP was providing some direct payments for farmers to continue being farmers. And I think also in terms of us as society, we do see some positive issues in maintaining rural landscapes. The main problem is that most of the money does not go to the rural environments, it goes to the intensive areas. So I think in this sense, there should be a need for a different model. It is clear that it makes no sense to put emphasis on 2% of the farmers who maintain 50% of the landscape, instead of looking at 90% of the farmers who indeed cover only 30% of the landscape, but these are the most important landscapes for us. It also makes no sense that the EU actually allows in the regional level that governments can decrease the ecological focus area to 2.5%. And the areas where they can do it exactly are the most important areas in terms of protection. So they can decrease the demand for ecological focus areas where you already have a forest or where you already have grassland. Whereas exactly these are the areas from an ecological knowledge that we know that require efforts to maintain high quality of the metrics, to maintain landscape mosaics with different habitat structures, to maintain connectivity between protected areas. So I completely agree that there's a need for a better ecological thinking, a better landscape structuring, and one of the comments and guidelines that we were giving in our paper is exactly that the CAP money needs to be spatially targeted a lot better. Originally, during the negotiation, the EU was saying that it is impossible because of equity reasons to spatially target the money, but it is actually incorrect, and it is possible to spatially target the money, especially in agro-environmental schemes. So again, this brings to the call to put more efforts and more design and context-specific design to provide more consultancy, because it is not a simple topic. There is no one-size-fits-all, and we know that. But if we don't have enough engagement between the scientists, the farmers, and the government, and in this sense, the scientists approaching the farmers and working together to achieve the goal, then we are not very likely to do any better in the coming years. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question.
I think so.
Yes, you did. So maybe we can get to some partial problems in the CAP and maybe its application in the Czech Republic. I don't know if you read some information, that information that we sent you. We are very worried about the results of the negotiations at the moment. It's been approved a few days ago by the government and sent to Brussels, if we are correct. And maybe, firstly, you mentioned that there was an increase of grassland cover in the Czech Republic, but that is low quality grassland, and that it was a very aggressive campaign. What would you recommend? How we should change this trend and what we should do with it, because we also see that there is a problem that we have basic measures which are very flat and with few obligations, taking most money of agri-environmental schemes.
It's a very difficult situation, and the Czech Republic definitely is not doing very well. I checked some numbers within the databases that we have from the paper. What I could find, and this definitely confirms the concern that you are expressing, is that Czech Republic has been the third fastest country in terms of increase in farm size. It has a 41% increase in nitrogen and phosphate fertilizers, which is 5th place in the EU. It has almost 30% decrease in employment among small farmers, and 60%, over 60% among the smallest farmers. It also has very high diversity within the farms. So the problem, as I see it, is that the government is trying to simplify the policy because it is not simple to handle it. But oversimplification is definitely the greatest risk for biodiversity. What I could offer to the government and to conservationists is to accept that any simple measure that asks all the farmers to do the same is going to be devastating to the environment. And the Czech government can definitely start sitting now again and think about how it is employing agro-environmental schemes. And if it is not going to do that, there is a risk that even legally it will fail to protect nature. And I do hope that our paper will provide the legal arguments that will cause the EU to take the money back if the government is failing. We actually did hear from the Commissioner for the Agriculture admitting that in fact the EU can take money back in case governments have failed. And I can reassure both the conservationists and the governments that we will try to reorganize through the Society for Conservation Biologists and analyze whether the government is doing the right thing. And if they are not, I think we need to openly say that we will have to evaluate outcomes in 2015 or 17, and if they fail, they should bear the consequences of that. Because Czech Republic is not going on the right direction. And when you look at the map of Europe, you can actually recognize the Czech Republic by the increase in grassland cover. Having seen papers showing the decline of biodiversity in grasslands in Czech Republic and reading about the policy, it is by far one of the most oversimplified ones. It is shared also by Hungary, who shares the same problem, and in other countries we are aware that the problem exists, partly because of lack of knowledge, but partly because of lack of will. So as a scientist, I can offer the knowledge. I cannot force the government into having the will. But in the case that my knowledge is not being used for the right purposes, it is also my obligation to show that they could have done better, and if they have to bear the consequences, they will.
It's very good to mention that oversimplification, because it is the argument we hear very often from the Ministry of Agriculture. And do you think that one of the answers or appropriate tools could be that farm planning system, the flexible approach that we know from countries? Because it's something I would say, having this very flexible agri-environmental schemes designed for individual farms and not those horizontal measures. Would that be an answer?
The answer is yes. Generally speaking, the answer is that there is a lot of hope, and the hope should be bottom-up. It sounds a little bit counterproductive, but eventually it is the single farmer that goes out and has to make decisions what this farmer is doing. And the farmers have a lot of goodwill, they have a lot of connection to nature, a lot of connection to the environment. And if we are talking to the farmers and slowly also starting to talk to the government about cost efficiency and show how the farmers is gaining, for instance, by selling the products as organic products which are good for the environment and good for the people in terms of health, and the farmers is gaining in terms of ecosystem services, gaining from pollination, gaining from pest control, gaining from less problems of soil erosion that every farmers do understand. Farmers do know nature and do know how the environment is behaving. They know that when they are removing the natural elements in their landscape, usually this follows. So when we are working with those farmers bottom up and help the government providing them with the funding, then we are helping to do a better matching between the farmers and the government. Because for the government it is complicated. For the farmers it's very hard to see the benefits of the CAP. But for us scientists it is actually possible to marry between the governmental budgets and the needs of the farmers. And if we are doing it better, we are actually bringing them together. And I think this is really the hope. And for that, for instance, we can do more monitoring. We can offer voluntary monitoring within agricultural areas, within farms, even by the farmers, so that they can see the benefits. There are some programs in farmland in France, and I would be very keen to see also monitoring programs developing in the Czech Republic for butterflies, for birds. For those monitoring programs that we do have the experience, we should empower the farmers to learn about their environment and to get a better understanding of how to do better. And if they see the benefits from that, and we can say, this farmer has done well and they do deserve the money, then we can help also the directing of the agro-environmental money. And this is not a process which will start today and end tomorrow. It is a complicated process. But I think, and I hope that with our paper we showed the process and gave some guidelines on how it can go. I hope that the process can start. It needs a few kicks in the butts, especially for governments and especially for the EU. And I hope that these kicks in the butts will come from those people who's responsible to do that, like lobbyist groups. This is not my job as a scientist. My job is to give the best science and to show the numbers. And if the numbers show that the EU has failed, then it is our role as conservationists to go to governments and say, look, the EU failed, but it is now our responsibility as a country to provide this service. And not only as an obligation to the EU, but as an obligation to ourselves. It's an obligation to the voters, to this government. Because we are paying the taxes, we are seeing the services, and we are also seeing the loss of services. And we have to travel nowadays more further away in order to reach places like Provence or other places which have beautiful agricultural landscapes that are extensive and receive agro-environmental money. Why? There are beautiful, extensive landscapes, extensive farming in Czech Republic. I've seen beautiful places in Hungary and Romania, and we will be losing them. So why not put the money now in order to protect the cultural heritage, the landscape heritage, and also the touristic services, which do have more money than in agriculture. So we have a lot of win-wins, but we have to see them and we have to communicate them.
Your presumption is that there is a strong connection between the farmer and his land. But as I wrote you in the paper, these bonds were very much interrupted in the Czech Republic due to collectivization, etc. And you find a very low number of farmers who really care about nature and their property, and it's quite a special situation in the Czech Republic. Do you think that this positive approach, like bottom-up, is possible in our circumstances?
I think positive attitude to nature cannot be created top-down. It can only be created bottom-up. And one example for a success in this sense was the urban garden monitoring in France, where they simply allowed people to start monitoring butterflies in their own gardens. And suddenly people noticed butterflies, and they also noticed the absence of butterflies, and they realized that they're using too many pesticides. And they also realized that the same agrochemicals have an effect on their own health. So when they want their children to be healthy and other people want to buy products which are healthier, we are not talking only about environmental benefits in terms of biodiversity, but also in terms of health. And additionally to that, when we are talking about the life quality of the farmer, because we do have the interest that the farmer enjoys both from the natural services and from the budgets, then there is a chance for development in terms of win-win situations and in terms of positive attitude. But I think there is hope in every country, even in countries where people don't go out to nature, like in Greece or in many countries in Africa. I think it is not necessary to give up on human interest in nature. There's always a tendency to prefer economic benefits over long-term environmental benefits, but we do see other examples, and usually these examples are local. I lost you.
Maybe I have a question. As far as I know, I completely agree with you that there is a change to change the things like bottom up to because the farmers actually, even now, the farmers want to protect nature and want to have nice landscape and so on. But as far as I know, they sometimes are just constrained by the rules imposed on them, and they cannot do beneficial things just because of this general policy, general rules. What do you think about this? As far as I'm not an expert in this, but I have heard about this situation that people really were ready to do very positive things in their own farms, and it was problematic just because there are the rules how to do this moving and everything. So what do you think about it?
I think I have to come back to the very beginning of our interview, where I said that flexibility is both positive and negative. It allows people to do bad, but it also allows people to do good. And I'm very aware of situations where lack of flexibility and over-demanding rules have resulted in damage to the environment. And I think the easiest example is exactly the Czech Republic, where all the farmers involved in agro-environmental schemes for protection of grassland have to mow their landscape at the same time.
That's what
It's a ridiculous rule, which is wrong from every ecological perspective I could think of.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Different animals require different environments, and if we are killing the basic heterogeneity of the single decisions by different farmers, the single mowing by different farmers, we are actually forcing them to use intensive tools, because you cannot mow your landscape by the daily basis if you are forced to do it within 2 weeks. So the government, especially in the Czech Republic, but it's not the only example, is forcing homogenization by strict rules. So we do need to differentiate between those situations that we must have some red line saying you cannot go beyond a certain threshold. We should put some strict rules on how much a farmer has to leave within the area, and we have to decide where. But on the other hand, when we put a lot of demands on farmers, and this is exactly why we wrote this paper from the first place, this can cause damages. And this is why there is a process of increasing awareness among the farmers, increasing engagement among the farmers, which is something that each of us has to do at the country level, at the local level where we are working. And at the same time, our paper was first and foremost intended to the EU and the government. Because indeed, the EU has to take an overarching aspect, which is why they invented the EU from the first place. If the EU does not take these overarching guidelines to provide the governments with a safety net, and if the EU is putting thresholds which are lower than what is existing currently in the member states, they're causing damage. Because by definition, when a member state is taking the law as they are, for instance with crop diversification, the demand of the EU is to have 2 crops between 10 and 30 hectares, and 3 crops as a minimum between 30 hectares and more than that. What is the actual average number in Czech Republic? 4.14 in farms above 30 hectares. 2.8, which is above 2, in places where it's between 10 and 30 hectares. And this is only the average number, not considering that the EU also counts winter and summer crops as 2, which allows the farmers basically to produce monocultures and get the money for that under greening measures. So definitely, if governments and if the EU are setting thresholds below what is necessary for nature protection, they're causing damage. And if people want to do good and instead they're requested to do bad, then obviously we're causing damage. So there are several elements within the CAP which we cannot say anything else, but these are wrong. The crop diversification measure has to be completely reconsidered as soon as possible, because it is potentially causing damage. The ecological focus area, this is a matter of decisions by the government, and we will have to see within a few years what they've done. Likely governments that allow using pesticides and other agrochemicals on ecological focus areas will cause damage as well. But I hope that now I explained a little bit better why I see flexibility as both a potential way to improving and a problem.
Yeah.
I suppose that by those guidelines you don't mean unification of conditions for the whole Europe, because I remember that the European Environmental Agency was working with the concept of high nature value grasslands, and they were trying, if I remember correctly, to somehow define H and B grasslands, and I don't know what happened with the concept, but I am sure that in our environmental schemes we don't work with it at all. Our targeted measures are only for protected areas and for Natura 2000 areas. But is there a concept for high nature value grasslands or those theoretical concept for those environmental ecological focus areas?
The answer is yes. In fact, within a document that was prepared and we have put in the supplementary material for our paper, there are guidelines, and there is a specific issue which is what we call dark green measures. Those are measures that were proven by evidence to support biodiversity. That's one. The second thing is that definition of high nature value is already done within Natura 2000 areas. So you don't need to develop a concept, you only need to apply the same concept out of protected areas. That requires nothing else but goodwill from the government. If the government will require doing that, people will do it. And it is not too late. They can also decide to do it next year or within 2 years from now. We have to, especially because of the fast degradation of grasslands, we have to press on them to do it now. There is a demand from the EU to map grasslands. It is our role to demand that they're doing it together with quality measures. And if they don't do it based on quality measures, given the evidence that does exist of what is high quality grassland, then they haven't done their job. This was one of the guidelines which were quite clear in our paper. Continue the mapping, but don't forget to put quality in there. Otherwise, everything counts, including both completely mowed areas which have no support of biodiversity and extensive areas which are extremely rich. Every ecologist and every consultant can help in defining what is a good grassland and what is not. It's only a question whether the governments will accept the challenge of actually employing these definitions.
After a few years of working, how do you assess the cross-compliance tool? And
cross-compliance is an excellent way of getting excuses to move money from one place to the other and causing a lot of damage. On the other hand, it also has some positive aspects in preventing legal situations where a farmer is doing one thing instead of the other, or trying to get benefits from two directions at the same time. So cross-compliance is a very important tool in the European legislation, but I must say that I'm an ecologist, and when I was trying to dig into the cross-compliance, I only understood so far that we will have to evaluate cross-compliance within a year or two once we see what they've actually done. Not all countries have delivered information, or at least I don't have yet the information of what each of the countries have done. But we are aware that cross-compliance is used, especially in the case of grassland measures, to actually reduce the demands from farmers and to decrease the requirements. So I see the cross-compliance mostly as a risk at the moment to biodiversity. We will have to await the results for what the government has done for each of the governments of the EU, and then bring it to legal experts to actually check whether cross-compliance was used to minimize instead of maximize the area for biodiversity benefit, because in that case they really do explicitly damage target 3A of the biodiversity targets for 2020.
Možná ty tam tohle rezoluce mohly
where another area of topics is forest measures in the second pillar in rural development program. We are very unhappy about our forestry measures in rural development program. We blame again our government. They don't try to put in place ecological measures. I don't know what is the general experience with the forestry measures in rural development program. Is it also as bad as agricultural measures, environmental measures?
I must say that you are moving beyond the range of the paper that we have published. In our paper, we decided not to touch the forestry measures. And
so we can avoid it.
It's not a problem to say something about it, but you need to decide whether you are asking about the expertise as a conservation biologist and a member of the Society for Conservation Biology, or are you asking about our paper? In our paper, we did not talk about...
The interview does not need to be confined to your paper, so it's interview with you.
If you are asking for my opinion as an expert on conservation biology, then the answer is that the next thing we are intending to review is exactly the forest and forestry policy in Europe. The fact that there is no forest policy and there is no forest directive, in my opinion, is one of the biggest problems we have in Europe. Europeans generally, and particularly Northwestern Europeans, have forgotten what a forest is. And the consequence is that they allow definitions of a forest which have nothing to do with forests. The definition according to the CAP of a forest is an area with trees or with species of trees that can grow beyond 5 meters and cover more than 10% of the area. Now, what this definition did not include, and this is purposeful, is that they haven't defined whether it's a monoculture or multiple species, so the word biodiversity is not there at all, or species diversity, and they haven't even mentioned the word native species, meaning you can actually plant a monoculture of eucalyptus, and this will count as a forest according to the CAP. I think I've said enough about what the CAP is allowing in terms of forest versus forestry. We all understand that the CAP literally allows forestry to be defined as a forest, and this is simply wrong, and it allows to cause a lot of damages in nature protection. On the other hand, we have to remember that there is a parallel definition of forest which occur within the habitat directives. So when we are talking about Natura 2000 areas, we do have the power to protect forests because it is not eligible for countries, and I'm aware of the case of Shumava, so I am aware of the situation where the government is trying to implement wrong definitions of forest, but here we should be strict with the government and ensure that the government is employing the definitions of a forest from the Habitat Directive. And in this case, it does talk about the exact species that need to occur there, and we do need to strive toward low intervention forests in the EU, otherwise we will forget that we do have some high quality, low intervention, old growth forests, even in the middle of Europe, even in places like the Bayerische Wald or Shumava National Park. We were visiting the park 2 years ago as part of the activity of the policy committee of the Society for Conservation Biology, and I have to admit that it was one of the worst forests that I visited in many years. I was actually pretty shocked to see how the government is allowing very intensive management within a biosphere reserve, a place that was agreed by the people, by the EU, and by various authorities, and one of the most important European heritage and protection areas in Europe. And I can only hope that the government will change the approach towards that. But this is beyond the paper that we wrote, and maybe towards the next one.
So maybe when we mention forests, we would also like to mention ponds. It's a Czech-specific feature that we have many ponds. We don't have sea, we have ponds, and they are not.
You'll have to repeat the question. I cannot hear you very well.
In the Czech Republic, the special feature of our landscape is that we have many ponds, artificial ponds, which are important for biodiversity too. And in the last programming period, it was the biodiversity on ponds was supported from operational program fishery. It was excluded from agricultural land and from agri-environmental schemes. Do you have any experience with dealing with these inland waters where aquaculture is realized and at the same time they are important for biodiversity? We know, for example, from Saxony that there is a possibility to manage them within agricultural land, and it is quite a positive approach or efficient.
The answer to that question is, first of all, that within our paper you will find some guidelines touching not only grasslands but also bogland. We didn't touch ponds. We did mention, on the other hand, the Water Framework Directive. And there are a lot of opportunities to find better coherence between the Water Framework Directive and the CAP. But I have no more experience, and I'm not familiar enough with the situation regarding ponds in the Czech Republic. So there are tools to touch this question if you're looking for coherence between, as I said, the Nitrates Directive and the Water Framework Directive, because these are actually the ones that are determining the water quality in these environments. And there are some improvements actually in this respect with the CAP, making more clear relations with the Water Framework Directives. But I'm afraid that this is far beyond my expertise, especially because I don't know the exact situation in the Czech Republic. So I'm afraid I cannot give a more accurate answer to the question. David, Lenka?
Yes.
I have a practical question, whether we can cut the interview and continue it in 10 or 15 minutes, and how long do we still need, because I'm...
We are almost done. We have a lot of material now, you know, so
okay, I'm asking because we actually have a deadline for something to be submitted within...
okay, you know, maybe
if you want to continue in 10 minutes and then we are more relaxed, I can also do that.
Maybe it's not necessary, because I think we have a lot of material and it will be still difficult to deal with it, and you know, it will be just printed interview.
Okay, then in that case, what is the next questions, and how can we start wrapping up?
We only wanted to ask about monitoring, because it's also our, well, let's say, failure. Because
monitoring of the consequences of you know, when. Yeah.
And in general, monitoring of ecological and financial efficiency, because none of it is done well in the Czech Republic, not only in CAP, but in, it concerns all grant schemes and all politics.
Well, the answer from my perspective is that I would not understand how people drive without having a dashboard, or whether we would ever take a flight in an airplane that did not have a dashboard in front of the pilots. When it comes to the CAP, and more generally when it comes to nature protection, I think we will be wasting a lot of our efforts and time and budget if we assume that we can obtain sufficient knowledge by paying experts. In my opinion, the real future in getting enough knowledge and in making the CAP and other policies more effective is by empowering the people and conducting citizen science, sending people outside, because this is the only way we can make the contact between humans and nature in a period where more than 50% of the people are living in cities, in a period where people don't know what are the benefits that nature is providing them. So my intention in the future, even personally as a coordinator of a butterfly monitoring scheme in Israel, which started in 2009, and we see how people are excited to join, we see how our government is very cooperative, and we see the expansion of monitoring schemes throughout more than 20 countries by now. I think there's a lot of potential for involving people in urban monitoring, in farmland monitoring, in natural protected areas, both by experts, by scientists, by citizens, by farmers, even by maybe government agents who need to go out and accept that we actually don't know what is the right or wrong thing. In the sense that there are a lot of different crops in the world, there are a lot of different habitats, there are many, many species. And the only way to actually get a better understanding of the consequence of our experimentation on planet Earth is to actually go out in the largest number of people and gather this information. We don't have a baseline information. In the Czech Republic, monitoring of butterflies only started in 2009, and only in several areas. In many other member states, there is still no monitoring. What about pollination? We know that bees are disappearing. We know that there are effects on crop production. For instance, in the UK, they're speaking about 30% reduction in crop production because of, or at least crop production that is pollinated by bees and by wild animals, and we don't know actually what is their status. It is basically by citizen science, which is very, very cost effective, that we can get all this data, because we are talking about putting a little bit of money into coordination of just a few people, of building a few portals to collect this data. And I will be very happy to support, even personally, such developments in any countries that would be interested in that. In the Czech Republic, in Romania, Bulgaria, any countries that are interested in such monitoring activities, I think should be supported by the experts. That would be at least my belief in that.
Okay, so I think it's perfect, and thank you very much, because I think that now we need to deal with all material, and really it's absolutely sufficient. So thank you, and good luck with with everything.
Thank you very
It
much.
was very good to see you. It was very good to meet you.
For your work, we very much like your paper, and we hope that the pressure to the European Commission will be stronger, and that things will.
Let us all cross fingers that if member states are not doing the right thing within this year, the EU will still be convinced that there's a need for a midterm review. And if we manage to do that, then we have managed to make the small change that is really important for seeing a better future.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.